Welcome to the Jack Weston MCAT podcast with your hosts, Michael Maleka
and Molly Hudash. Hey there, welcome back to episode 2 of the Jack Weston MCAT podcast with Mike and Molly. Mike, it's so good to see you again. How you doing?
I am doing so good. It's been such a fantastic week so far. I mean, the courses are going so well. Oh, it's like I do another course every single day, but the students so awesome. I just finished like working with one of our institutions now, so I've been a really great time. How about you? How about you?
Me too. Fun fact, I also just got out of a class.
Yeah.
You can see the energy that we get from our students. It really is the best place in the world to be studying for the MCAT. In this episode, we will also be joined by our fearless leader, Jack. Jack Weston himself. We are so glad to have you back on air for episode 2. How are you doing, Jack?
Hey Molly, hey Mike. I'm doing well. Thanks so much. Yeah, I actually taught last night how to study for the MCAT session, and I totally understand where you're coming from. It's sort of like a high, when you get students that really want to listen and they just want to take everything in. It makes this so much fun. So I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to engage with our audience in a different way than we're accustomed to, right? Podcasts are very different, but I'm excited for this episode.
Yeah, me too. And I love that you happen to have taught how to study today because ultimately that's what we talked about for the majority of last week's episode, right? So, episode 1, we talked all about how to get started with your MCAT game plan, right? Like what to prioritize and when. We went into depth on, how to structure your study plan, how to reflect and how to adjust as you go, right? We went through so much last episode. So if you missed it, definitely go check it out. In today's episode, we're going to keep that momentum going. We're going to be sharing 5 more tips and tricks for success to really help you achieve that goal score on test day. So our goal, right, is whether you're taking your test, in a year or whether your test date's right around the corner, you'll have something really wonderful to gain from today's session. So to start us off, we'll start off strong with our very first tip for today, which is all about practice, right? And how to get the most out of your practice. We talked a lot about practice, when to integrate different types of materials last week, but for this week, what I want to talk about is how to approach this without feeling discouraged if you are not getting 100% on your practice, right? It's how to recognize that ultimately your mistakes are your greatest gift, right? Because it gives you an opportunity to reflect on your strengths and your weaknesses and helps you figure out the direction that you should work towards in order to grow. Jack, Mike, I know both of you guys have worked with thousands of students. This mindset of, I didn't do the question correctly, which means I'm not worthy of being a doctor or I'm not capable. Something that I'm sure you guys have had to, help coach students through all the time. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I love this question because this is one thing that I want to flip the script when it comes to making mistakes. I remember I made so many mistakes when I was going through this process myself, and I remember I hit a wall, right? I remember when I was going through my prep, I remember like my score went down like 4 points from my previous exam, and I remember like just screaming into my pillow. I was like, "Oh my goodness, I keep on making mistakes." But kind of look back on that, I was like, "Oh my goodness, I just need to flip the script." Because I think we always think like, oh, it's something bad, but I actually like look back and I'm like, I'm glad I made those mistakes. Because I always say this like when working with students, is like every mistake I make now is a mistake I'm not making on test day.
Yes.
Because I think that's huge, right? Where when you make the mistake, the only mistake you can really make is not learning from it. Right?
Yes.
Like I look forward to like every mistake I make because now I'm like, oh, that's another learning opportunity that I know. That's something I didn't know before. And so I think it really comes from like not being afraid of the mistakes, but rather shifting like what am I going to learn from those mistakes and then make a priority. Don't make that mistake again. I know that was I think I had gone like at that point from like a a 5.0. I was at like a 5.09. This was like midway through my thing. I think I dropped down to like a 5.02 at like during one of my exams. But again, that was a learning opportunity. And again, I used that to kind of propel up to a 5.25 on test day. And so like this is one of those things where it's like every mistake I made sure I would never make those mistakes again.
I think that's so true. Like with students who delay their exams, they end up delaying because they don't want to see mistakes,
Mhm.
right? And they want to avoid them. And so what they end up doing is they study the things they're already good at. But that's not helping you grow, right? If you're already good at something and you're just trying to be a little bit better at it, that's comfortable. You have to be uncomfortable to grow. And obviously, you don't want to be so uncomfortable where you panic all day, every day, but you want to embrace that challenge, as you guys have said, and just, go for it. Like if you really want to become a doctor, you have to understand that this is just a part of the process. This does not define you. I think a
Yeah.
lot of students look at their
Mhm.
scores and they go, "Oh my God, like I'm not doing well. I'm not going to do well in the MCAT. I'm not going to get into medical school." And so they just avoid doing questions altogether. So I've seen that for so many students over the years, and I agree. I just start doing questions. And if you get something wrong, that's a good thing. Like you said, Mike, because you now know what to do so you don't make the same mistake on the actual test, because none of this practice matters. You're not being judged, right? The only test that matters is the one you sit in on test day. And even then, you can retake it, right? And so it's not the end of the world if you don't do well. So absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, it really does become kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Like if you say, I get a question wrong and shoot, you know what? I got it wrong. That means I won't succeed. And you shut down and you don't look at it again, right? You build a fear of that question or that passage and you say, I'm not touching that anymore because that's proof that I'm gonna fail. Unfortunately, that's the easiest way to tank your MCAT score, right? I love telling students something that seems to be counterintuitive. Everyone tends to be shocked when I say this, but when you are doing practice questions, the actual experience of doing the practice question does very little to prepare you for your exam, right? Like the use of a practice question, I mean, sure, is to help, help you kind of get used to the experience of taking a passage, especially if you do it under timed conditions, but really you learn after you're done, right? And I say this all the time especially when coaching students to get ready for their test day, if it's right around the corner, like, listen, on your actual test day and the days leading up, this should be the most fun of all in your prep because you've already done all the hard work. You've already learned from your mistakes. You've already reflected on that content. You've already built those passage strategies. Like all you have to do now is show up, right? Actually sitting down and doing the passages might be the scariest part, but it's also the easiest because you're just testing what you've already learned, right? That being said, if you just, you know, absolutely blow through practice questions constantly and that's all you do and you never review them, you're doing very little for yourself, right? That review is absolutely critical. And at the end of the day, it comes down to, yes, being comfortable in the discomfort of getting something wrong. And even for your questions you get correct, you need to ask, did I get it right for the right reasons? Right? I think a lot of people underscore the value of that review stage, but ultimately, at least in my opinion, that is the number one
Mhm.
most important step if you really do want to succeed, right? And you want to get a 98th or 99th percentile MCAT score, right? Take it from us. It really is worth its weight in gold every minute you spend.
Yeah, I know. I've again doing this for a few years now. You sort of see this pattern where it's like you can start seeing like how seriously, like you can start to like determine like which students are going to really get the score by who takes the review the most seriously.
Yeah.
Right. Like, and it's like one of those things where you do your best to like really, okay, we gotta be focusing on the review, but it's really those students that like comb through their questions, extract all the value. That's who will get the score. Right. And I remember like my situation. Like, I don't know which content area it was for you, Molly, because I feel like everyone has that content area that was a nightmare for me. For me, it was like electrostatics and fluids. Like, I remember when I used to like whenever I got an electrostatics or fluids question, I'm like, okay, not again. All right, I know, like I'm already like defeating myself, right?
Yeah.
But it was really like flipping it where it's like, okay, give this another shot. This is the time when I'm gonna get this right. Obviously, it wouldn't be that. It would always be like the time like before after. Still get it wrong, but I'm like, okay, that means there's still something else I don't know, right? And then I learn that thing, and then I get it again. Okay, I got a mistake. Okay, what else didn't I know? But the priority was I didn't make the same mistake again. All right, because again, these content areas are really big, right? So whenever I got a fluids question wrong, if it was about continuity of flow, all right, okay, I'm gonna focus in. I'm gonna zone in on continuity. Okay, but now there was another fluids thing about the Bernoulli equation. Okay, I'm going to focus on that thing. I prioritize, okay, this content area might be scary for me because I mean, I don't know about you, but I never learned that when I was an undergrad. So that's why it was so scary. Like those content areas I hadn't learned before. Like, but every time I made a mistake on it, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to make that mistake again. I think that's really key. So I'd love to hear what was that for you, Molly?
That's a good question. I think physics for me, because of the professors that I had in undergrad, was definitely a tough one, but I ended up really loving physics. I think what was harder for me and brought that immediate panic factor were the big, long chemical pathways. Um,
Mhm.
because same deal, like I enjoyed OChem when I was in undergrad, but when I was first creating my study plan, right, like that was my scariest subject. And so, of course, like everyone, I was like, okay, I'll spend, of the 4 or 5 months I'm going to study, I'll spend like two just reviewing OChem.
Mhm.
Terrible advice. Please don't do what I
Yeah,
tried to do,
obviously.
right?
Yeah.
Again, episode one, we debunked some MCAT study plan myths,
Hmm.
right? OChem, not super well represented on test day in terms of like number of questions, but those passages definitely created a lot of panic. And I'm really glad that I did sit down to unpack those when I did, right? During my content and practice phases, and even while doing my full length exams leading up to test day, because I remember very distinctly sitting down for test day and my very first passage in the very first section, which is Chem Phys, was an OChem reaction.
Oh,
And it was so
oh.
funny because the
Yeah.
test opened. And of course, like I'm nervous, but I'm also excited because
Mhm.
again, the second that the test opens up, like there's no more studying that you can do. You have whatever's in your head, you have the skills that you've built. This is go time, right? It's like a performance. Let me do the best I can do. But I remember seeing that and then just smiling to myself and thinking, I'm so glad that I worked on this because if
Mhm.
I didn't, that would send me into a panic for the whole rest of the section. If you do poorly in the first section, it's going to carry over into your others.
Mhm.
Make sure you sit with your weak areas.
Mhm.
And of course, this first tip of making your mistakes or turning your mistakes into growth opportunities. Yes, it's true of science. It's also true of cars. And Jack, especially since you're here, Cars King, right? I'd love to just get your thoughts on how best to review a cars passage because this tip is too important to skate by, right? And I know cars is a really sore spot for a lot of people. So what would you say best way to review a cars
Yeah,
passage?
I'd love to talk about that. But before I do, I do want to emphasize that when you start doing questions, it takes a while to do a lot. So in the beginning, you're maybe doing like 5, 6 questions, like literally just 5, 6, maybe 10, and then maybe 2 passages a day, right? And so don't be don't be discouraged by the number of questions you do. As Michael and Molly, you guys have said, like the review is the most important. I've had students who literally just do an exam every day. And I don't get that. I'm like, what? Like, why do you?
Yo, I want to notice our
Oh,
reaction. Like Amalia's eyes
man.
just like opened up like every day. Oh my goodness.
I
What?
thought you
Yeah.
were going to say once a week, Jack. Oof.
No, no,
Goodness.
it's like, oh, I'm like, I talked to a student, they're like, yeah, I'm taking the test in a week. And I'm like, okay, cool. What exams have you done? I did exam 1 on Monday and then exam 2 on Tuesday and exam 3
Oh,
on Thursday. And I'm like, how did you review any of that? You're just doing it for the sake. I mean, there's some benefits, like you'll get your endurance up. You may even burn out on test day at that
yeah.
rate. But at the end of the day, you're not reviewing. You're just trying to look for a better score. Like what you're literally wasting these exams. So the best thing I recommend is take your time, reflect, look at these passages, and that applies to cars. I mean, if you're asking me, okay, how do you review cars? Well, first of all, every cars passage is written by some random person who has their own opinion about some topic. Okay, that's literally what cars is. And so what you need to do is understand that you're not learning a hard science. You're not learning any facts. These are all straight opinions. And your job is to understand those opinions, understand those arguments. And so if you can't do that, if you're reading and you're not able to do that, there's no way you're going to be able to answer these questions. So first, bottom line, read the passage carefully when you review and make sure you understood what you read, right? And you don't need to understand every line 100% or every vocab word. This is not a vocab test. This is not SAT. Believe it or not, there's a lot of context in the sentence that can fill you in what the words actually are suggesting, right? And so that's a good thing. Second of all, when it comes to the questions, I recommend to my students, and we can talk about this, blind reviewing. Blind reviewing basically means you just don't know what you got the first time when you do it the second time.
Mm.
And the benefit of that is you're able to think clearly about what you should be doing instead of what you did wrong, right? And because if you go back and you look at your score and you know the right answer should be B, you're going to be biased and you're going to somehow pick B, but you're not going to really know why or how you can get there on your own. So at least challenge yourself, and we can talk about. I think we should have a whole session on episode on just that, on how to review properly, like going through an actual passage. But ultimately, just take your time and understand where you went wrong. Was it the reading? Was it answering the question? Were you not able to eliminate certain answers? Were you not able to identify what kind of question it was? That's what that's what we kind of do in the course, and that's what I recommend.
I love that. Jack, I feel like you hit on two really important things. One, right, you need to make sure that you are not checking your answers before you review, right? Because if you are, this practice is not super applicable to how test day is going to feel, right? Like it's very uncomfortable on test day that you end a passage and you have no idea how you do, and you're on to the next one. And did I do well? Did I do poorly? I have no idea. I have nothing to go on, right? And you have to finish an entire 230 question exam and have no idea how you did. And then you have to wait a month until you get your score back, right? So if you get that immediate gratification of, I just did a passage and I did amazing, wonderful, I'm going to take that, kind of ride that high into passage number 2, it's going to feel extra uncomfortable on test day, right? I think it also comes to the other thing that you were talking about, which is slowly building up, right? Like you don't need to be doing a full exam a day. And you also don't need to be doing, right, like a full exam or multiple of them right at the beginning of your practice, right? Don't bite off more than you can chew. If you are doing so many questions that you can't review them effectively, you're doing too many, right? Slow down. Do as many as you can without sacrificing that review, and you're going to end up scoring a lot higher on your real exam.
Yeah, I think when it comes to like cars, I remember I was not a natural cars person. Like I don't know about you two, but like cars for me was such a struggle because I think part of the review was also really frustrating because I don't know about you two, but sometimes when I look at the answers for cars questions, I disagree with some of the answers. Like I kind of like look at the solution and I'm like, how would I ever think that way? I see that all that, especially with some of the AMC reasoning. I swear, and again, maybe this is just me. I know there's somebody out there that feels the same way. There has to be, but I see these solutions and I'm like, how would I have ever thought that way? And it was so frustrating for me at first because of that, because I felt like I'm trying to review these questions, but what am I supposed to take away because I disagree? But I think that's where our strategy really came in, right? Because then I went from like trying to do it as if I was reading and doing like reading on my own, like a book, to I need a game plan. Because like you say, Jack, all the time, this is a game, right? So there has to be a game plan whenever you tackle these questions. And so it was like really letting go of the idea that there's a right answer all the time. Because I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think there is one all the time. I think is one answer that's not wrong. It might not be wrong. I don't think it's right. But every single time, well, because they owe you this on the exam, there will always be 3 incorrect answer options. And so I think it's stopping to try to always look for the right answer for me, right? It was like, okay, it was like recognizing from my review, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to always agree with them, and that's okay. So how am I going to, what am I going to do? What am I going to change? What am I going to learn from my review that's actually going to help propel me to that next stratosphere? And that was changing my strategy, kind of really to what we speak to here at JW is eliminate what's wrong. Stop trying to justify, right? Because a lot of the times, like that's the reason we're getting the things wrong, right?
Yeah.
Totally, 100%. 100. It's
Mhm.
all about elimination. And I can't, yeah, like, I want to talk about this so much, but I know we have all these other tips.
Yeah.
They're really important. I feel like
Mhm.
all of these tips deserve their own episode.
Mhm.
We
But
really do. And we will come back and we will make their own episode out of each one of these tips so we can really expand on them as much as they deserve to be discussed. But let's look at our second tip for today, which actually really kind of continues well from where we left off with our first tip, right? Which is to stimulate the real test experience, right? So ultimately, we need to talk about how to get the most out of our practice. How should we be studying? How should we be using our full lengths? How should we be conducting timed practice and using these real test day conditions to make sure that we're ready when, right, the actual exam starts? What do you guys
I,
think?
I took this exam like during COVID. Like this was about 5 years ago now when I took my own exam. And so I take this part so seriously. Like this simulating test experience to a T. Like I on my test day, I knew I'd have to wear a mask in the test center the entire 7 hours. And so, every single day when I did my practice exam, there was a mask on. I was alone in my room because I knew it would be uncomfortable at first, and it was, right? When that first 2, 3 exams that I did, I wore a mask, and it was the most bothering thing ever. But I got used to it because I knew it. But I could only imagine if I'd only worn a mask on test day and not any of my previous exams, I know that would have been so annoying for me, right? And I hear this all the time with other students because again, we work with so many students. I do a lot of the trial sessions. So if someone wants to experience what we're like here at JW, sometimes they meet with me, and I hear all these stories like, Mike, I was scoring in the 515s, the 520s, and then on test day I scored a 505. I'm like, I'm so sorry to hear that. Okay, like what was your prep like? And then we go into it, and but then I hear they would start their exam at 11 a.m. They would have snacks, while they're taking the exam. They would take breaks in the middle of sections, right? All things that they wouldn't have on test day. And then we kind of, when we talk, we're like, oh, that's why. It's because when you take this exam, you want to be simulating test conditions. And so I feel so strongly about this. Like when I see this, I'm like, again, I could talk for hours, but I don't want to talk too long about this.
yeah, so a couple things. This has been really important for us is when we make practice questions, we want to make sure that we use the same exact interface
Yeah.
because I believe this so much is like you need to feel like you're at the test center. And the best way to do that is, okay, let's practice passages and questions using the exact same interface, like literally the same color, the same font size. Everything needs to be identical. And that's what our QBank, our free QBank has. And not only that, but there's some products that the AAMC has, the question packs, the section banks that don't actually use the exact interface. Thankfully, their practice exams do, but their practice products they don't. Right, the CARS diagnostic. And so what we've done is we've created this Chrome extension add-on, right, where it's a free extension where you literally download it, you press a button, and it turns the AAMC product interface into the actual AAMC exam interface. And it also includes like these tutor-like solutions. Again, this is a completely free resource where you can simulate test day conditions, but also get a little bit of help if you want to see better solutions. Because I mean, I think they're actually massive help compared to the real solutions. So I think this is a great feature. This is a great product that everyone should check out. It's completely free. Obviously, you need to purchase the AAMC products to be able to use this, but it's a great add-on. And yeah, I agree. Like, let's just simulate test date conditions as much as possible.
I love that. Jack, thank you for bringing up the Chrome extension. And of course, our Q banks that are also free and also in the exam format, because it's a wonderful bridge from our last tip, right? Of getting the most out of your practice, right? Because ultimately, as we've talked about, sometimes you read a solution and you're like, this doesn't clarify the questions I had with it. I don't fully understand how I should have been reading this or what I should have been taking out from this experience and moving on to the next question. Like, I don't know what I need to learn. In our advanced solutions that are in that Chrome extension, I hear students talk about them all the time, right? They really do help add a lot of context and a lot of content to just help direct you on the different facets of the question that might have tripped you up. So again, you know what to go and review, right? We want to make sure we're learning from all of our smaller mistakes so that we don't make them on test day. I also love that we do open up those non-exam AMC resources in the AMC exam format. I always, especially with my course students, as they're getting ready to take their tests, especially like the last maybe 6 or 8 weeks out, I'll tell them you should not be doing any practice outside of that exam style format, right? Like everything that you do should mimic your test day experience to a T. Like even before, if you really want to, start studying in an hour and a half for cars or an hour and 35-minute blocks
Yeah.
for your exam. Like do your content that long, right? The more that you can expose yourself to things like the endurance aspect of having your brain fully on, phone away, no distractions, no food, no snacks, no water. I need to be on for an hour and a half. Or whether it's, the discomfort of not checking your answers while doing practice passages or questions back to back. Like start to eliminate any of the variables that could throw you off on test day, even down to things like what snacks you want to eat between sections or what you want to
Mhm.
do during your breaks to make sure that, you are in optimal testing conditions for you, right? Get started with this stuff early. Start
Mhm.
making your game plan to get the most out of that test day, 7.5 hours of seated time. Because you want to be ready. This should feel like just another practice exam when you show up to your real test.
Yeah, this is something I believe whole. I would die on this hill. If you are not doing everything on the exam, like when you do your practice exams to a T of what you expect test day to do, like you are leaving so much on the table. Like before my test day, I knew where my test center was. It was like a 20-minute drive from my house. So every day when I did a practice exam, I knew what music I would be listening to. I listened to the same piano music playlist every single day because I knew I'd be listening to that on test day. Right. And I actually took the drive at that time. So I knew exactly what road conditions would be like. I pointed to the door that I knew I'd have to go into because I don't want any surprises. So every single time I timed them. So I'd be like, okay, before my 8 a.m. exam that I'm taking, because it's a practice exam, and you'll be taking the practice and you'll be taking the real deal at 8, I listened to 20 minutes of music because I knew that's what I would be doing on test day. Right? I would start at 8 a.m. sharp because that's what I'd be doing on test day. I would have the same lunch every single time in an exam because that's what I'm doing on test day. You can see like it's to a T because we don't want surprises on test day. I remember sitting down on my exam and like during that time, like that, Hamilton, like the play, like in Broadway, like the Hamilton play. I remember all the time that ad was playing all the time during my prep. And so I remember just being so calm during my exam because I just done this. I'd done this like I'd taken like 10, 11 practice exams up until that point, again on a weekly basis. That I was just so calm that I remember while I'm doing it, like the Hamilton song coming on, like while I'm playing, because I was just, oh, this is just what I do. I've done this 11 times now, and this is exactly what I expect. And so it's this idea that test day is technically no different than any of your practice if you make it that way, right? But a problem I see is that we make it this whole new thing, right? It's this whole different thing. We make it to be this whole big thing, right? In reality, like we want to make our practice, like while we're prepping, what test day should feel like.
Yeah. Oh wow. I can't believe you actually went that far. I think that's intense and that's
Mm.
amazing.
Yeah, it's
That's like
I know, I know, I know.
preparing for like the championships. I feel like you guys are like Kobe Bryant, like super Mamba mentality here. But I think that's so true. Like waking up early, you don't take that for granted. Like wake up early, practice physics or physical section like first, right? Because that's what you're gonna see on test day first, and then cars, and then bio. I mean, obviously you don't need to do that in the very beginning of your studies, but the fact that you did 11 exams and the fact that you reviewed it the same way, you did your breaks the same way, everything the same way, it felt like your actual exam was another practice exam. And that's the goal, is your actual exam is going to be quote unquote practice exam 6. Right now, as of the date that this has been published, right, there is no practice exam 6. There are 2 free exams, and then there's exams 1 through 4, right? And so, right now, or yeah, I guess you could say consider one of the
That's
free.
like, I think the math is a little bit off there. I think it's practice against seven. I
Close
wasn't
enough,
gonna
close
say
enough.
anything, but I was like,
Yeah, well, no, it's interesting because they make a lot of students call the free exam, the free scored
Exam
exam,
5.
practice
sure,
exam
yeah.
5,
Yeah.
and they don't even consider the sample test an exam.
Mm.
Uh,
Yeah.
but regardless, there are 6 exams. Okay, fine, exam 7, for instance. But the point here is treat it like a practice exam, right? That's absolutely key. But yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I love that. And that's funny. Yeah, sample test. We're talking all AMC exams. We actually release our own practice exams as well. I think Jack, are we at 5 or 6 now?
We have released 6 exams since last month, and these
That's
exams
amazing.
are literally like what you're going to see on test day, and they're completely free.
Mhm.
So, if you're thinking, wait a second, how do I get more exams outside of the 6 practice exams that the AAMC has? You can just go onto our website and you'll get them absolutely free by just doing them. Just go look for the tab that's called practice exam. The reason why we've made them free is because we want everyone to have the best premium resources possible, not just people who can afford them, not just people who think that we have the best stuff. Check it out and see for yourself. Obviously, when it comes to scoring, like the actual score, I always recommend using only the AAMC because they're the ones who actually make the scoring, and their algorithm is exactly what you're going to see on test day. Ours is very close. Like you'll probably be in the same range, like 2 or 3 points. But to be precise, I would always recommend using the AMC resources for that reason, for that thing that you're looking for that score, right? But outside of the score, the questions, the difficulty, the frequency of types of questions that come up, all of this is pretty much identical to what you're going to see. These are all original passages, original exams. They simulate test conditions perfectly, in terms of timing, in terms of the look, everything. So absolutely check it out.
Mhm.
Yeah, it makes me so excited that we have those. And I remember taking a little sneak peek at the process while these were being developed. The amount of brain power and thinking and planning that went into stacking passages the way that they are back to back, right? Or making sure that particular question types or content areas are not overrepresented, and also making sure they're not underrepresented, like creating a balanced test that's realistic, that mirrors what you're going to experience on test day. There's so much work that goes on behind the scenes, and so I'm really glad that now you guys have the opportunity to come and see the product of all of this amazing work from our amazing content development team. So definitely go check those out. And Jack, you're totally right. We put out all of these exams so you guys have more to use. We've talked about how to get the most out of it, practice breaks, all of that good stuff. Um, and I think having more just allows you to fall into that rhythm a lot easier, right? The AMC exams are absolutely gold, right? You can't substitute those. You really should be looking at them. And again, reviewing them very thoroughly, but having more exams to look at and to get adjusted to that pacing is important. And that actually kind of brings us to our third tip, right? Which is to help us develop smart test taking strategies, right? And by this, I mean in the moment. Shoot, I don't know the answer to this question. I'm halfway through the exam and maybe I'm running behind. How do I course correct? What can I do in the moment that will help make sure that I maximize my score, not just on one passage, but in the entire test section, right? And how do I make sure I don't take my success or failure and let it sway my next test section? These are all things that you need to be building while you're taking your practice exam, but right, let's set aside some time. Mike, I want to hear your thoughts on this.
Test like this is one thing that just speaks back to like those like simulating those test conditions because it's such an amazing opportunity to develop those strategies. Like I could if you had asked me like after my chem phys section on test day, how did that section go? I'd have no idea because it's already out of my mind. Right? Like every single section, I think those breaks are so intentional because I think like those give you an opportunity to completely reset. Because that was something I felt so strongly on because I've heard from so many students like over the years. And something I always hear is that, oh, the chem phys section felt bad. Like you were saying before, chem phys section felt bad and it really impacted the rest of my exam. But then when we check in after, which section do you think was their highest section?
One
Yeah.
double.
100%. It was always chem phys, right? And so this is one thing where it's like you want to develop these strategies early because you don't want something like that to impact you. Because really, yeah, your bio section is not influenced whatsoever by chem phys. It'll only be influenced if you let it. So like a strategy where you are like resetting, and I don't care what that looks like to everyone. For some people, it's meditating. For some people, it's getting zoned in for cars. Changing that mindset to get in that car's mindset. Like again, like if you ask me like right after test, like I remember walking out of that test center thinking, I have no idea what I just did the last 7 hours. Like again, it's completely out of my mind because again, it's just a reset after every section. So they like practicing those things and developing them is huge, absolutely huge.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so a couple things. When you're going through a section and let's say it's not going well, don't let that impact your next section, right? Be completely focused. Like you said, Mike, just train yourself to just be in the moment, focus on what you're doing, because you never know how the exam is going to be scored, right? Exactly. Obviously, it's scaled and whatnot, but you don't know your score, and so don't guess and don't try to predict and don't worry about it because it's already done, right? For that section, just when you go through the motions of practicing every day, I think you're going to notice nuances on how you think and whether that's a positive thing or a good thing or a bad thing for your test day anxiety. Everyone's going to have some sort of anxiety on test day, but if you are able to consistently think a certain way and develop those test taking strategies, I think you're going to be way more successful, right? Molly, what do you think?
Yes, for sure. And I'm actually glad that you brought up the experience of test day anxiety because I know I've worked with a lot of students who have this, right? This intense fear. Like, I like to say that this is when the fun begins when test day starts because, again, you're ready to go. You've already learned what you've learned. You can't go back and study more. You have the preparation you have, right? It's go time. For some students, that can be an incredibly overwhelming and incredibly stressful panic inducing experience. And I think that getting extra practice with that, especially if that is, something that you've experienced before, is absolutely crucial, right? Because ultimately you won't know that feeling will set in, right? That feeling of panic will set in until it's happened before, right? So if you do get lots of practice, trying to take a timed exam, you might find the first time that you run out of time, right? Shoot, that was horrible. Your exam's over. You didn't get the score that you want. Oh my gosh. Again, it comes in with that growth mindset. Okay, that was miserable, right? I felt awful. My confidence was, took a hit. I do not want to experience that again. How can I move forward, right? I think getting practice is important, but also building specific tools for yourself to clear that mental clutter as it starts to accumulate is important, right? And this is true whether it's the anxiety talking or just sheer exhaustion. Um, I think it's important to have a moment, like Mike, you were saying, to meditate or to, just zone in. Some people have a mantra that they say. Personally, as someone who loves to exercise, I was the weird person doing jumping jacks for a minute when I was
No way.
on
No,
my
I don't believe. No, that's
I was.
wild.
Get some, I mean, for me, that's like going to the gym or getting exercise is a way to
Mm,
just like
mhm.
blow off steam and relieve stress. So like having access to that, even just for a moment, was my like pattern of, okay, leave it. That section is over. I have another section that starts in 9 minutes. Get it out. This is a completely new Molly that's taking this section of the exam, right? Leave it all at the door. If you are within a section, right? Like maybe in that experience I shared of my test day experience, right? Opening it up and the very first passage was something that I was really scared of, right? You can absolutely take a second, right? Put your feet flat on the ground, close your eyes, take a couple deep breaths, right? It's going to be okay. At the end of the day, it's one passage. You have 10 in a science section, right? Plus discretes, like this one question or this one passage will not make or break your score unless you let it, right? So whenever you're done with the passage, especially if it was really tricky for you, or if you look at the timer and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm low on time, rather than keeping that very high level of panic and just trying to rush through the next, sometimes it's worth the time to pause, even if you take 15, 20 seconds, take a couple deep breaths, right? It's going to be okay. Try and see if you can bring that heart rate down, bring some you know, calm and tranquility back to your test day experience. It's okay if it lasts 30 seconds, even a minute. It's worth it because if you can come back either for the rest of that section or for the sections that you still have to take before it's over, I think it's going to improve your score a lot. Just that focus and the mental energy boost that you can get from that.
I think you're saying you're hitting on something really important, which is like make a game plan for when you feel a certain way. Like you knew, like, oh, whenever I feel this way, I'm gonna just reset, take a breath, and then you go. Because you knew, like, you'd experienced that before in your prep. I remember on like my own test day, like in terms of Chem Phys, I didn't have that first passage, but cars. Again, when I was going through this, like cars was kind of like my insecurity a little bit when I was like starting out. I'm a Canadian for background, so cars is like really, really important here in Canada. And I remember the very first passage. I read the first sentence and I thought to myself, I have no idea what I just read. This was a sentence I've never seen before. And like it looks like English, but it doesn't like sound like English. And so, but I already experienced this 1,000 times before. Right? I've already experienced passages like this 1,000 times. So I knew exactly what my process was. And so the process that I used at my time was very like it was something that I had practiced a lot. And so I had my process where if I read the first two sentences and I had like no idea, I would just go to the next passage and I'd come back to this later. This was something that was really helpful for me. And again, it's not something I recommend for everybody, but it was one thing where I can imagine if, because again, so many people were in that exam center with me, if they saw that first passage and try to take it head on and allow them to let them throw them off for the rest of the exam, I can imagine that would be really disheartening. And so this is one thing where I knew this was my game plan. If I read the first two sentences and I was like, I, I don't know what I just read, I move on. Get to those other passages, and again, the rest of the exam was totally fine. Right? I can't remember a single passage from there. I think there was one about whales. I think that was one. But then when I got back to it, and it was really great because when you get back to it, I believe so hard in that your subconscious, your subliminal mind is working on it in the background. Right? You're focused on what you're working on, like those passages, but when you come back to it, your subconscious has been working on it that whole time. So when I came back to it, I remember like it wasn't that bad, right? But I didn't let it like throw me off, but I knew what my game plan was. And so when you're within the section, again, with through the practice, you'll find certain patterns. So you're like, oh, whenever I feel this way, I need to know what I do because that's how you get that confidence because you've done this before. Because again, test day is just another practice exam.
This might be controversial, but I think it's an important statement to make. And I'm saying this because of my experience and how many students I've worked with. I think your test taking strategies, right? Your mindset is just as important as the content that you know. It's
Oh,
it,
even
it,
more,
For
even
sure,
more. What do
yeah.
you? I would say it's
Not
even more.
controversial.
I mean, it's crazy though to students who are just studying for this test
True.
because
Yes.
you ask anyone who took this test, right? You can ask your friends, your family, whoever, how much content did you see? And they'll scratch their head and say, not a lot. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't study it. You have to know everything because you never know what they're going to test you on, right? And so, yeah, content's very important, but the test taking skills, the strategies that you have are so, so important because this is a reading test. This is all you're doing is reading passages and answering questions for the most part, right? The other thing I wanted to add before we move on to the next tip, is that, I love that strategy, Mike, where you're like, oh, if this passage is hard, let me just skip it. As long as you don't spend too much time already on it, right? If
Mm-hmm.
you're already in the thick of that passage, just plow through it, right? Just go, but if you read it quickly and you're like, oh, this is bad, and that might happen in the very beginning because your mind is all over the place and it's stressful, right? Going on to the next passage actually a brilliant idea. What I recommend to my students is do a cars passage in the morning right before you actually go to the test center. I know that sounds weird, but I think it's like a warm up. Like if you go look at NBA players, they're just shooting basketballs for like 2, 3 hours before the game, right? And so why not warm up your brain before the actual event, right? And so that way, if you do see a crazy cars passage, your mind is a little bit more comfortable or situated to that passage because you just did a passage this morning, right? And so I don't know, that's my way of recommending to students to not freak out, but I'm sure you guys have your own tips and tricks that have worked with students. So yeah.
I know we mentioned this last episode, but between the three of us, we have more than 20 years of MCAT experience. And I love hearing all the different perspectives on how to prepare students for this exam. Because yeah, I mean, if you get a passage that from the very beginning, your warning lights are on, right? Like your sympathetic nervous system is active, you're freaking out. You have to have a plan, right? And it sounds like some of us are like, you know what, I'm just going to skip this passage. For me, I usually say, okay, you know what, I have at least one passage that's going to scare me, right? If I feel that way, I'm going to take the pressure completely off. I don't care if I get a 0 out of 5 on here, right? I'll read it, but this is my passage. This is my passage of the 10 or of the 9, depending on the sections, that like it's okay if I don't do perfect on this, right? I'm not going to waste time on it. I don't personally, if I go past it and I know it's waiting for me, the dread builds.
Mm.
Just for me as an individual, I'm like, oh gosh, well, I'm trying to do this one, but like it's always in the back of my mind. It's like in the waiting room of my brain. So for me, when I'm in that, I say, okay, you know what? I'm going to spend maybe half, maybe 3/4 of the amount of time I would normally spend on a passage for this one, right? But I'm not going to let it freak me out. This is my passage that maybe I won't do super well in. I'm still going to read it. I'm still going to show up with the same tools. Maybe I'll flag the questions that are really difficult for me. I like to say flag, guess, move on, right? If you don't know it, you look and you panic, flag, guess, right? Do the best that you can to eliminate and then move forward. If you have time, cool, come back for it. But for me, knowing that I've already had that passage and it can't get any worse.
Mm.
That was the scariest passage I could imagine. It can't get worse. Sometimes I think I've trained my brain to actually be excited for those because
Mm.
once you've reached the scariest passage, every other passage feels fine in comparison. And that makes sense with what you were talking about, Jack, which is, get a warm up if you have a tough passage at the beginning, right? Before the exam even starts, hopefully that warms you up and you're not as scared later. I would just say be careful doing a really tough passage and then checking your answers. Because if you do that and you're like, oh my God, I just got a 2 out of 6 on the cars passage I did before my exam, and that lets you, if that makes you extra nervous later, maybe you should take a page out of our book as our second tip, which is, right, practice the way that your test will occur. Maybe you don't check your answers that morning. You do it as a
Mm.
warm up, but you don't let that, immediate gratification affect your test day. But anyways, you guys, tip number 3 was developing smart test taking strategies. Again, this is a tip that could be its own episode, but thank you for all of your thoughts and experiences here, because I think that is so valuable for the students listening, especially those of us who are getting ready to take an exam that's coming up. I want to transition into our next tip number 4, which is kind of less about test day as an individual experience and more about the entirety of your MCAT prep, right? How can you make sure that you are not burnt to a crisp by the day that your test day rolls around. Like, how do you make sure that you are maintaining and building momentum throughout your practice without accumulating anxiety, exhaustion, and fear of the exam? For me, I think this is basically a question of work-life balance.
Hmm.
Something
Yeah.
I'm super passionate about, but I want to hear from you guys first.
Yeah. You remember that story of like when I like screamed into a pillow because of my score dip? I think if I had a great work-life balance at that point, I would have been so much better to deal with that scenario. But I remember I had gotten caught in this vicious cycle. And I know again, I know there's somebody out there that's the same where I set this super unrealistic schedule. Like I had the thought where I'm going to study for this like it was a full-time job, right? I've heard that a million times where the 9 to 5, right? But then I would do well in the morning, like study for a few hours, but then get distracted. And then, okay, maybe study a little bit, but then before I know it, it's like 11, 12 o'clock. And then I do that revenge bedtime studying where, okay, well, I don't deserve to sleep yet. I need to go study. And then I'd be up until like 2 or 3 a.m. And then
Oh,
and then I would like, okay, well, I'm gonna wake up early and then, get back on my 9 to 5. And then, oh, I'd wake up and then feel awful, right? Again, I got caught in this vicious cycle where I remember, again, I hit a wall during my test taking study. And that was like when I was like, okay, I need to reset. And so I had to I just like change my calendar, like, okay, what do I want my calendar to look like? And so I changed it where I first prioritized the things I wanted to keep doing because I wasn't, meeting friends. This was again during COVID. And so there was a lot of separation at the time. But I made space for things I really wanted to. I got back into exercising. I had a little workout place in my basement and I hadn't used it all, right? I was like, okay, every morning I'm going to go there first before I start my studying. In the middle of the day, during prime time hours, I was like, I'm going to be online with my friends, right? I'm going to go on Discord and chat with my friends because that's how I connected because I just cut myself from that social connection and then worked my studying between there. My study blocks was like, okay, 3 to 12. I mean, 9 to 12, right? I would have a study block and then I'd be online with my friends from like 12 to 2, 12 to 3. And then after that, I felt recharged. And then, okay, I'm going to study now from like 3 to 6, 3 to 7. Okay, now I'm going to have dinner. And then now I do a little bit of like last review at the end of the day. Okay, and then I set a cutoff time. So I hit this wall and I'm like, man, imagine how much better I would have felt if I had just started studying that way because it was more sustainable. And I think whenever I talk to students, right, I'm sure everyone's seen like these YouTube videos. Like this was my study schedule that took me to a 520 and they were like I treated it like a full-time job. And it's not realistic for most people. I think what's so much more is to like make a plan that's really conservative. Like what can you stick to? I think is always the best plan.
Wow. I like that's exactly what I want to share is like being realistic is far better for your outcome than making this stringent, impossible schedule that pretty much no one in the world would ever be able to stick to, right? And then punishing yourself over that, over not sticking to that schedule, right? Instead of starting off with, oh, I'm going to study 10 hours, why not study for 1 hour and reward yourself for doing that 1 hour, right? And instead of going, oh, I didn't do 10 hours, I only did 6 hours, so I'm a failure, right? Like that mindset shift is everything. I think a lot of students don't realize this, but the MCAT should be your number one priority when you're studying for it. There's no doubt, right? Like it should be your number one priority. It can't be your life. It can never be your life. And I find that a lot of students, all they want to do is sit in a room like a cave and just study all day. That doesn't work for the MCAT. That might work for your, chemistry exam or final when it's like the last couple days, right? Of your, where it's coming up. But for the MCAT, it's a marathon. And the reason why it's a marathon is because they want to see if you can actually study for 3, 4 months, right? They want to see if you can replicate like med school studying, which is obviously a lot longer, but it's like a mini boot camp for med school, right? And so they want to see how well you adapt. And so if you don't stay balanced to some extent, right, you're going to do worse. And so you have to uh, prioritize the MCAT, but that doesn't mean you can't socialize. That doesn't mean you can't exercise. That doesn't mean you can't eat healthy. That doesn't mean you can't sleep. Everything matters for your success. It's not just studying, right? And so that social support, that kind of, camaraderie with your friends, like you're talking about, Mike, it is just as important as how many amino acids you can memorize, or you know what, how many physics equations you can memorize. That stuff is important, but it's not the be all and end all, right? You need to have a sharp brain. You need to have a healthy mind on test day, and the only way you can do that is if you treat yourself well throughout the entire journey, throughout the entire process.
Yeah, I love the idea of, the MCAT as basically boot camp for medical school, because I think that is a very important frame of mind to have, right? Basically ask yourself, okay, if what I'm doing right now represented how 4 years of my life was going to be, could I do this for 4 years? Like, chances are 90% of us would say no, right? I'm not, Mike, like you were saying, I'm getting only a couple hours of sleep a night. I'm forcing myself to study for like 12, 13 hours. I wish I could turn back time and give that version of you a hug, because that sounds so exhausting. I'm so sorry that you went through that, but it's something that a lot of us do. It's almost like, we've been trained in undergrad. Hey, if you just pull an all-nighter, you can learn more, you can study more, you can memorize more, but that's not sustainable. There's no element of sustainability there for yourself, your body, your mind, your heart, right? Like, if you just grind, you're not going to be getting where you want to go, right? I also think that if you set out, if you move back home, you don't have to pay rent or groceries, and you don't have all of these responsibilities. You're like, I'm not going to work for 4 months. All I will do is lock myself in the room and study. It becomes this like omnipresent chain. Like, it's just miserable. Like, I just have to clock in, clock out. Like, it becomes such a chore. And because you have nothing else going on in your life, you have nothing else you want to work on at that time. You have an excuse to study really inefficiently because you don't have anything else that you're doing. It's a really bizarre phenomenon, but a lot of the students that I work with that have kids or have school or have a job that they're doing or an internship or whatever it may be, they end up doing better, and they spend half as much time as everybody else studying, but they know, I have this going on. I need to make sure that, with the 20 hours a week that I can realistically set aside, that I get the most out of that 20 hours, right? I think the scarcity mindset of, I do not have unlimited time. I
Yeah.
cannot put in 80 hours this week, right? I need to put in 20. That's a small amount of time. It incentivizes you to get the most out of it, right?
There's
And to anyone listening, if you don't have all of these other things, make them. Make it a job to get 8 hours of sleep. Make it a job to see the sun every day. Make it a job to, get exercise, fuel your body. If you are not operating at or near your peak performance as an individual, your score will not reach the optimal level that you could achieve, right? So don't shoot yourself in the foot. Treat yourself with kindness. Give yourself a break, and give yourself that incentive, right? Time is not unlimited, and it shouldn't be. That sometimes allows us to get less and less productive as time goes on.
Yeah, I think like one thing that's really important, like you said, is have something else going on. Like I know I picked up a cool hobby while I was like studying. Like when I kind of reset, I was like, okay, I need to find something I like. I set out to build my own computer. Like that was something I'd always wanted to do up until that point, and I was like, you know what? I want to do that. So whenever I wasn't studying, I just had something else to do because I think it was such a good break to like to do something that's just not the MCAT, right? Because I think again, like it becomes our life a little bit, and you want to do your best to like have something else going on, right? And but again, it doesn't have to be this huge thing. But like I spend time like okay during that like 2 hours in the middle of the day. Again, my friends like again, I was like in a gamer group. I still love it. Again, I can chat about that for hours. But again, they knew so much. So I would learn, I would ask, and this would just be something that's not MCAT related. It was such a good break. So I wasn't studying all these things. I wasn't doing these passages. It was something where I was doing something I enjoyed, but I felt like that I was gaining something from that thing that I enjoyed. And so I think that also like leads us really well into our next tip, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think the last tip has to do with very similar ideas to what we've been talking about. It's how to stay motivated, how to stay on track, right? Everyone is motivated by their own unique mosaic of factors and experiences and desires, right? And tip number 5 for today is to keep that momentum true to yourself, right? What motivates you, Mike, is going to be different from what motivates me. I remember I was hiking and camping as often as I physically could,
Mhm.
because that's where I feel most connected to myself. I love being outdoors. I love, getting out in the wilderness, right? That's what makes me feel so excited and in tune with myself, right? And it's also getting in clinic, getting in, opportunities that remind me of why I'm studying for the MCAT, right? Volunteer, do whatever you need to do. Keep an eye on what your motivation is, right? Whatever is driving you to be a doctor, right? Why do you want to be a physician? Go engage with that, because there's nothing like recentering on your why to help push you through those longer hours, right? Or, that exhausting active recall. You need to know who you are and why you're doing this so that you can stay engaged and stay excited and motivated and confident, because ultimately, again, that's your why. Not only is that going to be your personal statement, but that's going to be your calling card. When you get up and walk out of test day feeling really good, this is why. This is why I did well. This is why I care, right? So stay connected to that, whatever that looks like for you. Be true to that and keep your mind on it when you feel really exhausted.
To add to that, this is going to be the most difficult test you probably will ever take. And it's the most important because it will determine your career path, right? Being a doctor, what school you're going to go to, right? A lot of it has to do with the MCAT. And what I've noticed is that students end up not taking this exam or leaving this field, not because they're not capable of doing well. It's because, and I've seen this with a lot of students, like really, really brilliant, smart students who are just like, I can't study for this test. And the reason why they can't study and finish it, right? I mean, it's okay to retake, it's okay to delay it, right? For whatever reason. But they end up not taking it or they end up not applying is because they didn't have a strong why. And they just weren't meant for medicine. They were meant for business. They were meant for something else completely different, right? And that's okay. Like the MCAT is designed to see how bad you want it, right? It's not designed to test how intelligent you are. It's not designed to test how good of a physician you're going to be. It's literally how bad do you want this profession? And so your Molly, like your point about going and volunteering, right? Or doing research, things that bring you back to why is going to be the best motivation to finish this test, right? Because it gets you closer to your dream. And if this is not your dream, I know for a fact that this test will stop most students who don't want to be here, who don't really truly want to be here. So yeah, I agree 100%.
Yeah. I think there's no wrong answer when it comes to your why. I think just knowing the why. I know being in Canada, like again, it's all about cars here, but a lot of the times schools just use the sciences for a cutoff. But my why wasn't, oh, I need a high score for the MCAT. My why was I just want to know that I can do it, right? That I can get that 99, 100th percentile. Like I believe I have the capability. Because I remember I was like in my basement, like it was after a workout and I was like exhausted. I was like, why am I doing this? Like, why don't I just study cars most of the time and then just meet my cutoffs for the sciences? But it was very much like, if even if I knew that after I write my exam, like the month after, like I, you know, worst case scenario, I pass away, would I still take this exam? And my answer was yes, because I wanted to prove to myself I can do this, right? That I can get the score and prove that, to have that fulfillment that I did the thing and I did it well. And so, again, everyone's motivation is going to be different, but I think reminding yourself of that motivation constantly, especially during those times when you're like, oh man, I'm tired, or oh man, like this is even like if you get like, there's a score decrease, or maybe you're a little bit frustrated with your studying. I think reminding yourself of that, why, whatever it is, right? I think is such an amazing motivator to kind of keep you going through those times because it'll be hard. Like this is not an easy process that, anyone who's choosing to do this process is undertaking. But to get through it, like you said, Jack, like again, this is the test that they're trying to do. And to get through it, reminding yourself that why, whatever it is, I think is probably the best way to do that.
And that's why I love being here with both of you guys and being here with all of the students as part of our Jack Weston family, because here we believe that if you have the motivation and the desire to put in the work, put in the hours, and get through this process, there should be nothing else that's stopping you from achieving your dream, right? Like if you have the grit and the determination to make your way through the MCAT, to take these tips that we've shared in mind, right? There should be nothing else limiting your ability to succeed, right? So I love that we kind of wrapped it up this way, right? We're talking mindset. We've actually talked about so many different amazing things so far this episode, right? Let's do a quick recap, right? Our first tip was all about review, right? It's how to turn your mistakes into growth opportunities. Very, very important, right? Our second tip was make sure that every time you're doing practice, you are simulating the real test experience, right? Don't get complacent. Get everything out of that experience because that's how you're going to succeed. Right? Tip number 3 was to develop smart test taking strategies. And this occurs both after a section, but also within a section. How do you course correct if you find yourself off course, right? Tip number 4 was maintaining that healthy study or work-life balance, right? How do I make sure that I am able to achieve everything that I want to achieve cognitively, right? It's by supporting yourself mentally, physically, and emotionally, right? You need to make sure that you have the capacity to do this on a long term because guess what? That's what medical school is going to be like, right? And that brings us to our last, which is just find your why and stay connected to it, right? You have to find what is going to motivate you and what is going to make you feel confident in yourself, right? And in your abilities. I will say this right now, every single person that's listening to this has shown a dedicated interest in the MCAT, right? Clearly this matters to you if you're here and you're still listening, right? We want to help you succeed. That's our why, right? We want to make sure if you are willing to make this investment of time and energy and all of this, we want to be here to support you, right? That's why we're here. That's why we care so, so much. So thank you guys so much for being here. Really excited for our episode next week. I think we're going to be talking about flashcards.
Yeah, Anki is definitely something that we're doing. And also, like if we have so many ideas that we want to be doing, like with Anki, with exam, like there's so many of these things that we want to expand on. But if anyone listening has ideas, things that you want to see like us talk about, like you can drop them in the comments or come to live sessions. Like we hold completely free live sessions, Jack, myself, Molly, that you can just talk to us. Talk to us and tell us what you want to see, what you want us to talk about because again, there's so much to talk about this exam.
Amazing. I'm excited for the next episode. Flashcards are
100%.
Yeah. So get excited. Make sure you tune in next week. This is something that we'll talk about in a lot more detail, right? Again, it comes back to getting the most out of your practice. So stay tuned. We will see you guys next week. Can't wait.